The next 45 minutes, we're joined by Dr. John Breeding in studio. He's the author of several books. We carry both of them at Infowars.com. The Wildest Cults Make the Best Horses, and another book about bringing kids up, which is a lot of great ideas that I've used in my own family. And Dr. Breeding's here to talk about the architecture of the psychological dictatorship, the controllers, the Malthusian eugenicist view, the drugging, the forced inoculations, everything that's happening in society. Dr. Breeding, good to have you here.
Hey, Alex. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. It's great to have you. I hadn't had you, I think, in almost a year in studio with us. You've heard me answering those questions, burning up the time we had, but there's so many facets to all this. What do you think about the open building of FEMA camps across the nation, openly saying Northcom's now going to occupy the U.S., openly saying the whole anti-terrorist system is for the American people, the forced inoculations being hyped, just the whole bizarre landscape we're witnessing?
Well, I think it's horrifying, and I think you do a really good job of translating things, which is a real key. I think that part of the dynamic in terms of the InfoWars and the PsyOps kind of thing is basically that whatever you want to sell, you package it in a language that somehow sounds appealing and beneficial. My specialty area is in psychiatric oppression, and that's one key aspect of this whole thing. And it's very important to understand the basic dynamic, which is this, that psychiatry is a mechanism of social control first and foremost. You know, it masquerades as a form of medicine, but it's really about social control outside of military or law enforcement channels. You know, the basic dynamics, and this is why I so resonate with your end game and your whole focus on eugenics, is that what people don't understand is that psychiatry is in and of itself a form of modern day eugenics. Psychiatry was a big force in planning the Nazi final solution. The Nazis modeled their final solution after American eugenic programs that were wanting to eradicate life unworthy of living in the United States, sterilization going on in all kinds of states here. The Nazis modeled after that, did their thing, and modern-day psychiatry evolved from basically German psychiatrists that came to the United States and continued that basic dynamic, which and the key belief is that problems in living are due to biological or genetic defects. The early American eugenists called it germplasm, defective germplasm, and so we would sterilize and segregate these retards and morons and all these other people in the United States in the early 20th century. Now it's called mentally ill people who are biologically or genetically defective. We put literally, 50, 60 million United States citizens on these brain-damaging, brain-disabling, sex, libido drive, disabling psychiatric drugs, call it medicine, say that they have biological or genetic defects without any evidence of that.
Well, take Endgame. We have one of the head psychiatrists in Texas testifying before the legislature, and they say, why are you putting close to 70% of kids on drugs? And he just said they have bad genes. There's no test for that. It's just a made-up quack. No, they want to pump the kids full of drugs because they get pharmaceutical money and because it's a tool of control. I mean, it's so obviously quack, made-up garbage.
It's so obvious when you get them to actually say it overtly. That was Dr. Joe Burkett from Fort Worth, mental health system up there. We managed to get some attention in the Texas legislature on the foster kid situation. They're getting the brunt of it more than anybody. It's like you said, 70% of teenagers in the foster care system are on multiple psychiatric drugs. And when Joe Burkett was pinned down by Susanna Hupp in that committee, he basically said, because they come from a bad gene pool. He was outed, and he looked pretty bad because they don't want to say it out front. They don't want to say it out loud, but that's the belief system behind it.
Now, I've talked to these people in private. They'll say, what's wrong with killing 80% of the population? I mean, these are sickos. These are sicko control freaks, and the average person out there needs to grow up and realize that there are real monsters in the world, and there are a bunch of control freaks who are setting up their guild here in the United States and taking over every facet of society. Stay with us. Dr. John Breeding's our guest. I have a story here out of the New York Post. This mother of three, no criminal record. personal website. It's all Glenn Beck Fox News clips. A little bit of me on there. She went out to the military base because they admit it's going to be a FEMA camp to take some photos. And they came running off the base and grabbed her, and she's now in jail. And they put her in a mental institution because she believes it's part of an internment camp, even though I have NationalGuard.com saying they need troops for the internment camps. It says 4 internment camps and resettlement inside the United States. And they're on the same TV saying get ready for forced inoculations and all this. And I've seen national TV attack myself and others lately. And the mantra is, when I'm on these other radio shows being attacked, that I need to be put in a mental institution, that we're all crazy. We saw this in the Soviet Union, but more and more in the United States, in cases like Charles T. Sell up in Missouri, they actually grab people. You don't ever even go to trial. They're now grabbing political enemies and just throwing them in the psychiatric gulag, and then 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, roll you out after being in solitary on antipsychotics, your head shaved, you're drooling, and they say, look, he's crazy. Isn't this just, in many cases, just an excuse to carry out predatory, sadistic, criminal behavior?
The estimates I see are about 1.5 million United States citizens incarcerated in psycho prisons every year who have not committed any kind of crime that's on the books. That's the point about psychiatry being a mechanism of social control, and it's the point about the root mechanism of psychiatry is coercion, the right of the state to forcibly incarcerate and treat, which means inject with poisonous toxic substances, any citizen who is judged by the powers that be as needing to be in that kind of treatment. So in a sense, it's all political, every one of those 1.5 million. And then more and more you're seeing the kind of dynamic that you described with that woman, where anything can be interpreted if you get a psychiatrist to agree with you, and psychiatrists are paid flack, so you can always get a psychiatrist to agree with you. You're vulnerable to being incarcerated against your will without a trial.
Well, more and more we see them arresting patriots. Like a neighbor will see an old man cleaning his gun. I've seen this in the news, and they're scared of the gun. So the police come and arrest him and say 3 or 4 guns and some ammo was an arsenal. And then you always hear a week later that the old man is in a psychiatric facility because he believes that he's being oppressed. Now, he's been arrested for not committing a crime. So he's saying, I'm being oppressed. And then they now have designations, as you know, doctor, saying he's being oppressed and his rights are being violated. In fact, that's in the New York Post. That is the proof of insanity.
Well, what I want is for the listeners to really get and break down that split that happens in the mind where you can be all against oppression and all against police state and stuff, but somehow this screen comes down when you look at somebody who's judged as acting bizarre or has some belief system that's a massive affront to yours, and all of a sudden you get behind the state and say, oh, that's mental illness, they need treatment for their own good, and you call the police or you call the state to get that person help from a psychiatrist, and you think you're doing some kind of good instead of the truth that you are an agent of a police state that's coercing that person against their will, however extreme or bizarre their behavior you might think it is. And that's what happens every day. What happens to this woman is horrible for confronting, a government totalitarian action. But it's happening to literally millions of our brother and sister citizens. My own kids were out in the front yard a few nights ago. A neighbor called. All of a sudden, 4 squad cars come up. They confront these 2 teenagers, and finally they say, well, you should go inside because it's suspicious that you're out here. And what were they doing? They were sitting out there drawing pictures and sitting on the curb.
Yeah, I've been to your house. Nice little middle-class area, and so, they're out there drawing on the... No, I mean, now, if you're not inside watching the glowing television, that is... I send film crews all over the country, and I go all over the country. We can be in small towns, big cities. The police walk over and say, you're not allowed to film the city hall. You're not allowed to be here. Why are you here? It's total secret police land.
Mental illness is a made-up concept. There is no biologically or genetically based brain disease that constitutes a mental illness. It's made up, and yet people believe, oh, she's bipolar, oh, he's ADD, oh, that person's schizophrenic.
Well, most of the time it's the dyes they're eating and the sugar and the caffeine, and then once now, as you know, Dr. Breeding, they have drugs for the Prozac now. They have drugs for the side effects. Stay there. When we come back, I want to break down in the long segment coming up all these different facets of this and how they're pushing drugging the kids and how it ties into other activities of forcing people to take vaccines. And now they're saying you're mentally ill if you don't trust the government and want to take the shot.